Hi team, it's Eban here. In this article, I want to look at a question that I get asked all the time. Why are software estimations so hard? Now, unlike predicting the weather, where it has no impact on the outcome that's actually going to happen, when you predict software, look into the future, that prediction can have an effect on the outcome. Some of the reasons that software estimations are so hard is because, as a species, we're incredibly over-optimistic. And if you apply science and look at the psychology behind it, you can find out some very interesting reasons. And if you can know those reasons, then you can work within them to make sure that your estimates are better. So what are those irrationalities we do? In this article, we look at 7 time estimation biases you need to know about: the team scaling fallacy, anchoring, the sequence effects, the format effects, length of task description, the magnitude effect, and the time unit effect. We hear from Magne Jorgenson, who's a top researcher and has recently published a book on time predictions. And also we're going to hear from Ron Jeffries, who's the co-founder of Extreme Programming, and what he thinks about why software estimations are so hard. Pretty exciting article, and I'm really happy to present this information to you.
And one thing that very early struck me, that to only think about what we do here from an engineering perspective is very limiting. So I thought about this is very much about human making decisions, predictions, estimates. And so I have collaborated very much, started very early collaborating with people in psychology.
I love one of the quotes in your book, and I'm going to dive into the book shortly, but you said, people are predictably irrational.
Yep.
I love that.
That's for sure. I mean, there are patterns in our biases, definitely.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
you can predict the biases pretty well.
In the moment when you're faced with, am I going to have another beer, or am I going to go home and work on the laundry? You know you should go home, but you know I can just have one more beer, and that is the natural level. The natural level is not our ideal. For the few moments sometime in our life when we were really good, the natural level is down here, and I think we always think of ourselves as better than that, and I think that in truth we're flawed, and we're dealing with a lot of problems, and the cat is sick, and what am I going to do about the car not running right? That all those things are always there, and that we always imagine that they won't be there next time. But we look at the parts we understand, and the parts we understand we think we can pretty much do, and they're pretty easy. Yeah, I've already done that, that's pretty easy. Should be okay. And so I think we wind up focusing on the parts we understand and assuming that the parts we don't understand won't be any harder than that. And that is never the case, because that's what you really ought to be doing, is behaving adaptively as you go forward. You will discover that some of the things you thought were easy are difficult. You will discover that some of the things you thought were difficult were easy. It's always silly to imagine that you're going to know at the beginning of something everything you're going to know at the end. If a team was actually estimating perfectly and getting done on the clock every time,
yeah,
something's wrong.
So it is risky to reward accurate time predictions or penalize over-optimistic time predictions. Attempts to optimize the prediction actually may come at expense of other goals, such as productivity and quality. And you've got some interesting graphs in the book as well. So how do you balance that? Like, what's the trick here? Like, is there any secret formula?
Mm-hmm. No, and there hasn't been many studies on this topic, but it's first of all, it's very clear that an estimate is not like a weather forecast, where your forecast is not affecting the actual weather. An estimate might affect how you work. There are indications of that. You break it by not having estimates in many contexts. Of course, you will still have an idea of how much it should cost, and you will prioritize based on that. But if it's not really needed to have an estimate, it looks like, at least one study, the best thing is not having it. You cannot instruct people to not think about this estimate. So
Yeah.
either you know about it or you don't know about it. And if you know about it, it will affect you.
We started taking story as it was brought to us in the planning, and we would associate it with what we called ideal days. We would say, how many ideal days would it take me to code this? So we would count how many ideal days we got in 15 real days times the number of programmers. Well, it turns out it takes about 2 or 3 real days to get an ideal day. Because of all the friction that goes on in the work, and probably because of some innate bias in your estimation where you think in 2 perfect days I could do this and it would take 3 days anyway, because you're too optimistic, whatever. The thing is this: as soon as you make the relationship between points and time, and that is what it was for, will come to be a manager in the room who says, these 25 points should have taken you 10 days, and they took 13 days. What's wrong with your estimation? I have a fellow that worked for me named John Overmars, and John could prove that any deadline could not be met, because all he had to do was start writing down more details about what had to be done. And if we have any idea how to solve it at all, I mean, of course, if you don't know how to solve it, who knows what your estimate should be? It should be like, your estimate should probably be, go away and I'll work on it a while and come back later.
When people are uncertain, and they have this scale, this Fibonacci scale, they're again more than likely to select the middle value. And the middle value of a Fibonacci scale is much lower than the middle value of a linear scale. Because it's increasing faster and faster. So the middle value of a Fibonacci scale is lower than the median of this linear scale.
So that's going to skew.
So you will tend to, at least in the beginning, before you get more experience, tend to underestimate if the uncertainty is high and you use the Fibonacci scale. But the magnitude effect is also very much about that when something is highly uncertain, you will tend to move into sort of the middle ground. So we tend to underestimate large tasks and overestimate the smaller ones. But it has certainly to do with the level of uncertainty. With low uncertainty, you will not have this effect. With high uncertainty, you will have this underestimation of large and overestimation of the small one.
We're looking at the percentage of participants ranking software developers. So without even knowing what the problem is or anything like that, how, as most competent, as least competent, and most trustworthy and least trustworthy, where did this experiment come from, and how did you come up with it? Like what's the genesis of this one?
It has its roots in that people use estimates and even more prediction intervals as indicator of competence. It's a little bit, if I ask you about an estimate and you say, it is between 100 and 1,000 hours, I would say that, you don't know much about it.
Yeah.
While if another one says between 90 and 110 hours, then it's clear that I would guess that he had more information. What would people actually by default interpret these estimates as? And because you get rewarded by having narrow intervals, and that is a biasing factor, because you know that if your boss asks you and you give a very wide interval of what this might cost, then you might be right, but you will also interpret that you are not as knowledgeable as another one who has a much more narrow interval, maybe because he knows less than you. So that was the background, that there are not, an estimate is not a neutral thing. It's interpreted in many ways, and competence is one of the things that we interpret by listening to an estimate or an interval.
And here, developer D is actually, when you know what's going on, they're the most likely to be correct.
Yep.
Yeah, but they're viewed as the less competent. So there's it's almost like a paradox in some ways.
Yeah, in order to show uncertainty, to display or to report the uncertainty, you have to be very confident. So, you have to be very certain about yourself to display the uncertainty.
I can guess on that product and quote you a number, and you will give me that money, and then I'll either be right or I'll be wrong, and you will either be happy or we'll be sad. Or we can spend the smaller amount of money to learn. So how about if we do that? If you can do that, then of course you're in great shape, because 90 days in, you ought to be able to learn everything you need to learn about a 1 year, 2 year project. And so it's a reasonable investment to make. I don't think it's an easy sell.
Is we went to the point where even on the legal contracts, you've got to choose, are you going to do a fixed time contract with a variable scope, or are you going to do a fixed scope contract with a variable time? Yep. So we flipped it and we said, well, which one do you do? And we gave him 2 quotes, one for the fixed time. So fixed time, here you go. That's how much we'll get as much as the backlog done as we can in that time. And it's going to be awesome. Yep. But the scope's going to vary a bit because we're going to learn from the users and all that type of thing. Yep. Or you can choose this bigger number, which is fixed scope, but we don't know how long it's going to take, because the further in the future we try to look, we just don't know the unknowns. And it's had, like, from a psychology point of view, dealing with the customers and dealing with the developers and everyone, it was an amazing shift. So
I know that there are many clients that would like to know what they get for the money.
Yep.
And the fixed price idea, but they should actually aim for the flexible scope idea, because that's giving them much more value.
I certainly want to not answer that question because I don't really know the answer to that question, but I do know 2 resources. If you want to do it the hard way, you read Steve McConnell's books on estimation, and he's got every estimation technique you could possibly ever want to have. And you could study that and use any of them, because they're as good as anything else. They won't be accurate, but there is no accurate way to predict the future. If we could predict the future, we would all be driving expensive cars. And George Dinwiddie, Dinwiddie, has a brand new book on estimation that just came out. And it's very interesting because it looks at estimation from an agile angle. And so I would say, look at those, read those, and see what you think about estimation. But for most projects, I would concern myself with flow and not with estimates and actuals.
If there were a favorite, I think I would point at well-conducted planning poker.
Yeah.
That connects a lot of good research, and it's at the same time practical. So we can do it even better, but then it will be very costly. So estimation is all about getting feedback, learning, adjusting the estimates, and yeah.
The basic notion is, as developers, just focus on building software incrementally, keeping it alive, delivering working stuff frequently, because that's your best hope against whatever. If you're in a good situation, it'll be great. And if you're in a bad situation, it'll be the best you can do.
If anyone's interested in talking with Ron or any of his team, he's available with agilementoring.com. Looks really good.
Thank
the
you.
cost is not at all expensive when you think about the wisdom and everything you're going to be getting. If anyone out there would be interested, please jump in and take a look. I'm sure Ron would be more than happy to take a conversation.
Thank you for mentioning that. That's always worth mentioning.
So to introduce the book, the title of the book is Time Predictions, Understanding and Avoiding Unrealism in Project Planning and Everyday Life. And there's 2 authors on the book. How did you guys come together and decide on the actual book and how it was going to go out? And I'm very interested to see why you guys are in this particular order on the author list.
Well, actually, I started on that book on my own. And then I got this PhD student, Thorleif, the first author here. And we decided on writing that together. He has a PhD in psychology. And by writing this book, we had the best collaboration I ever had in life. So many good discussions, writing.
Wow.
And it actually took us a year to write it, but it was worth it because all the discussions, all the nice time we had. And as you mentioned the order, in the end, we flipped a coin and that decided the order.
There's a link in the article that you can click on and go to. The Kindle version is free. Thank you, Magne, for giving this knowledge away. You're a good bloke. I hope you've enjoyed hearing me talk to these legends of the industry and learnt about the biases and pitfalls of doing software estimations. If you know what these pitfalls are, you'll be able to put what I call the bumper lanes or measures in place to be able to create software estimations that are achievable. If you're able to manage those expectations early and put predictions in place that are achievable and create a great outcome, you and your team, your people are going to be far happier. So I encourage you to really think about implementing this within your organization. Thank you.